the Rangers Journal Night. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Brown Brogues. This episode we're going to take a look at Sean Dyche. Dyche recently, or notably known as the Everton manager for 2 years, and also had a stint in the Premier League with Burnley. No other better person to talk about Sean Dyche than obviously an Everton fan, so I'd like to introduce Ryan. Ryan, how are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Nope. Glad you're here. Tell us about Sean Dyche then. Tell us about his style of play in the first couple of years he was there.
Yeah, let's start out with style of play, because that's the one thing I think immediately when you think of the way Rangers wants to play and their position in the Scottish Premier League, obviously, as a more dominant club. It's hard to reconcile that with an idea of Sean Dyche, kind of the way he plays. Again, to his credit or discredit, I suppose, he's never really been in charge of a top club. Burnley were very good in the Championship and went back up, but the style of play just doesn't seem like it's really a fit. Now, I do think he gets a little bit of a bad rep for the way they play, you know. He does really concern himself with sitting behind the ball at times. He's clearly doesn't have a ton of ideas in the final third in terms of with possession, but I think his tactics are a little bit underrated. You know, he typically does play a 4-4-2 defensively. His core basic tactic is really kind of 4-4-1-1, and what he chooses to do with that second striker is kind of interesting at times, but he seems more focused on kind of transitionary elements out of the defensive setup rather than getting in and dominating the ball in the final third. That being said, he's not really a counterattacking guy either. It's kind of interesting. He's more focused on the transition into the final third. Obviously very good on set pieces as well too. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, it was kind of a little bit of what Everton needed at the time. Financial troubles couldn't buy people. And to his credit, other than the final year, which we could talk about a little bit because Kevin Thelwell is obviously the sporting director at Rangers now. And I think there was a little conflict just reading in between the lines and having a little bit of inside scoop. But yeah, I mean, I think he did very well. He did very well in difficult circumstances, not exactly the same type of gig, but you know, low possession. He did press high sometimes too. It wasn't like he just completely sat back. Did do some clever stuff, mostly 4-4-2, sometimes 4-2-1. Occasionally played a back three. I thought Everton's setup would have been conducive to that in the final year. He didn't do that and didn't use some resources that were at his disposal. But yeah, just not a lot of dribbling, not a lot of carries, a lot of long balls for sure. And I would argue if there's one thing he really needs in his team, he needs that target type center forward. He had a bit of that at Everton, but without that, I think otherwise he's somewhat adaptable. But you know what I mean, Jock? I mean, that doesn't really sound like something I would think a typical Rangers fan would think I'm excited about, you know?
Yeah, I think when the name was linked, I think it was 2 weeks ago, there was quite heavy press links towards Dyche, and I think myself included, I thought, oh, here we go. Because obviously from what we've seen, and I would watch a lot of Premier League football, I was like, it's not going to go and excite fans, get fans off their seats. It's not going to win trophies. That kind of style of football. To me, this is me outside looking in. I always thought he still was trying to do the Burnley thing, where it was like, maybe get to the 40 points, maybe now 45-point mark, and then see, because I always thought there was one season with Burnley, he did manage to take them into the Europa League. So he has a slight bit of European experience, but I don't think that would be enough to cut it at Rangers.
No, and if you really kind of pick apart some of that stuff, it's still the same style of play. Very low XG, not a lot of great opportunities, but they finished pretty well and they were very stout defensively. I don't necessarily think Rangers needs to play like that. That would be borderline comical, to be perfectly honest. And I actually, ironically, I think his better season was the 1920 season where they finished 10th with 54 points. The underlying stats and performances were actually better. But yeah, I mean, with Everton, it's hard to judge them a little bit too, because look, I mean, Everton, the last 3 years have the lowest spend in the Premier League by a mile, really about the only positive one. And in the last 5 years have literally the lowest net spend in the entire English football, pyramid. So resources have been scant. It's been difficult. So on one hand, you give them credit for making do very well under difficult circumstances. I mean, points deductions. It's really remarkable how well the team performed last year in particular, kept them up the year before. But, also maybe it's just not its same circumstance, nor is it necessary. And I will say this, I would be surprised, and you mentioned it, Kevin Thelwell, Kevin Thelwell didn't bring in Sean Dyche. So while he kind of head nodded and said, yeah, okay, and worked with them, I don't think that would be his choice, assuming he has a large amount of input. I don't know the relationship between sporting director and kind of ownership, but I would imagine this is going to be a lot of Kevin Thelwell's call, I would guess.
Yeah, you would think being, going to be sporting director, or will be whenever, I think it's probably June he starts. I think, or if not, if he's not already, making signs towards this takeover team from the 49ers. You've touched on his formation, and I know from watching Everton over the years, goals has been something that's been hard to come by, and that's part and parcel of obviously the style he's playing and what he's trying to do in the games. Does the personnel factor into that as well?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, Everton just didn't have the ability and the flexibility to gather a bunch of dynamic offensive talents, man. I mean, they just simply didn't, and some of the players he relied upon and got a lot out of made sense. He's a guy that would prefer to play a traditional winger. His fullbacks are not going to push up. They're not, his forwards are not going to cut in the half space and dominate the ball and get guys forward. So that was good for some players. A player like Vitaly Mikalenko is a little bit more of a defensive-oriented left back, so that worked out. And it helped Dwight McNeil a ton. Not only is Dwight McNeil great on set pieces, he's more of a traditional winger, so he could occupy a lot more space on the left side. But someone like, who's probably near and dear to your heart, Nathan Patterson, is a guy that's very much an attacking fullback who we could have a whole episode about how poorly his development was handled and when the recruitment came and whatnot, but he's a guy that just has no place in that sort of schema. Like, he's not going to sit back and defend and ping passes from deep. He's a guy that wants to get forward and use his athleticism. So the other thing too is he doesn't really play through the midfield. So Everton didn't have a luxury, a lot of on-ball midfield guys. They did have one in Onana, who was phenomenal on the ball, could really get on it and dominate the game. Ironically, Everton fans would say, why did he not do more of it like he does in Villa? Well, that's because of the scheme Dyche plays. It's a lot of route one. It's a lot of direct football stuff up to the center forward. So as a result, like a guy like James Garner, who is ball control is probably a weakness, but he's got length. He's tough. He wins battles. And from distance, he can ping it around. Worked out very well. So, it is what it is. That's why, immediately, Jock, I don't think that style of play is going to be one that really works. And so, on one hand, you could say, well, he didn't really have the weapons to really develop his attacking approach. But even when he had good teams in Burley, even in the championships, and they scored more goals, I didn't see a lot of variation. I did watch a lot of football then in his approach. So reason stands to believe he wouldn't change the approach or adapt that much style of play wise with Rangers.
I was thinking there then, so you're talking about the personnel then. During games management, I know, was something that was a struggle for him this season, because there was games Everton went 2-0 up and then they've lost 3-2 and things like that. Is that something because he's too rigid and he sticks to the same plan throughout the game? He doesn't adapt to a game, or does he adapt to a game? And again, it's maybe a personnel issue that's let him down.
Yeah, I mean, I think his changes are subtle. He really does like kind of that singular style of play. And I think Everton, you could argue maybe it's personnel, but they did very much struggle when they had to have the ball. Coming from behind was an issue as well. But I think some of it this past year, and you look at what David Moyes is getting a lot more out of this team. But I think one of the reasons why, in addition to giving them some freedom, even though maybe they're not super talented, Dyche really this past year, you almost got this feeling that he just had enough. The recruitment team brought in some players that you would have thought would be perfect. Like Ilman Ndiaye is a very good player. He came into Everton. He didn't do very well as his boyhood club at Marseille, but really started off very well. But Dyche would not play him in that second striker role. And that's where he played at Sheffield. I mean, he's like literally perfect for that role. When you thought of the type of player that could really work off a target player in that 4-1-1, instead, he would opt for Abdoulaye Doucouré. He was a good player, but not really a 10. And then he even moved Dwight McNeil in there. And look, Dwight McNeil has a great left foot, but he's not good in tight spaces. He's a long guy. He's very left foot oriented, gave the ball away a lot, couldn't really get into the final third by himself. And just, it wasn't his position. He's a good player. He is, but that's not the right one. And like, didn't play Jake O'Brien. I mean, Jake O'Brien is a really talented footballer. Like, at least play a back three. And So you just look at some of the decisions, Jock, and you just kind of add some questions like, was he really trying? And so I think it was disjointed between him and recruitment. And that speaks to Kevin Thelwell a little bit. It was his group that did the recruitment. They couldn't spend money, but even the players he got this year. And, one last comment I'll say before I turn it back over. You mentioned like the way he plays and kind of the way his football is, but more importantly, his ability to attract talent. If you go and look in his recruitment history, I mean, he likes to have authority and power. He's not necessarily going to work great with the sporting director, but look at the players. I mean, almost never could you find a young international player to come play for him. It was very English based, and his team continued that way. It really morphed into a very UK based team. In fact, at one point we looked and we couldn't find a single player born in the Americas that ever played for him at Burnley. Like, think about that for a second. This is a team that was in the Premier League a lot.
Yeah.
And now I don't know if that's necessarily him. Like, he's not a dumb guy. He's a pretty articulate, smart guy, but like none of that seems very congruent with what I think you'd want at Rangers. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That brings me to my next point then. Obviously, you touched on Nathan Patterson, and like we had obviously, I mean, Nathan Patterson was flying whenever he did go down to everything because Gerrard had given the start. Sorry, in that COVID area. And then he went for us, which was quite big money, and he's one of the sort of more success stories of our youth academy and one of the more recent ones. And then as sort of the season went on, and he's still not getting games, we can't understand. And the natural link now, any transfer window is on Nathan Patterson's coming back. Again, so that's a focus on youth development. Is there any other success stories in that? Like you're touching on there, there's not really. It seems to all be sort of UK-based players he's going for.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, if you look at the average ages of his squad, they were always very old. I mean, it was really hard to find anyone under 24 that played a significant role in his games as well in the past, in previous seasons. Everton brought a couple people through. There was some talent, but a lot of the young talent was sold. Again, that's not necessarily Sean Dyche. That was to balance the books, man. I mean, It was unbelievable. You think about the sales of Tom Cannon or Ellis Sims and guys that maybe weren't necessarily going to be great. So, but I also don't think the Nathan Patterson exclusion was purely due to youth. I think there was a little bit of a tactical problem there, but there's no question, Jocko. He definitely would rather have had, an experienced hand in there than a younger player. So yes, that would be a natural concern. Now he may say that's not true, and he'll look at Jared Brantwaite, who played a lot, a young player. But I mean, what are we talking about here? I mean, this guy's a Rolls Royce, man. I mean, he came from starting at Ajax, 6'5", runs like the wind, 2-footed. I mean, someone like that. It's not like he had a plethora. And by the way, he also insisted on playing Michael Keane right away too. Like he didn't throw Brantwaite right in. So he was kind of forced to, probably would have eventually.
Yeah.
But still, the point is there's definitely a little bit of trepidation, I think, for him to really take a lot of risks, take a lot of chances on young players and really give them a shot. So again, I think the Scottish League is a very good league to bring in young players. Obviously, Rangers is a big name. Any Scottish young talent's going to consider coming through there. I don't know if he'd necessarily be the best guy that's really focused on youth development. You know what I mean?
Yep. No, I'm going to hear you on that one. What sort of relationship then does he have with his players? Because from what you're saying there, he obviously seems to sort of put the focus on sort of the tried and tested, the experienced, sort of older head.
It's a tough one to gauge, really, because there was I don't think there was ever really issue with spirit of the team. They really fought hard. That being said, if you think about some of the players that they brought in, Dwight McNeil was already there. Michael Keane was already there. He'd already worked with Dyche. Tarkowski was brought in. That's a guy they worked together and knew each other well. So he automatically kind of has his field general in there. You know what I mean? Ashley Young was brought in, old experienced guy. Seamus Coleman, who's, wonderful leader, and the team was already there. So, maybe those are the guys that kind of kept it together. There's certainly a player or two that were frustrated with him. I mean, I think there's a lot of murmuring that Dominic Calvert-Lewin was not interested in signing an extension at Everton, partially because of the way they were playing in Sean Dyche. Could be a lot of things, but I think that's the one thing a little bit to his credit. I never felt like the team gave up. And think about how tough that would have been last year, man. I mean, 2 points deductions, like everything working against you. You can't, even in January, you're thinking, dear heavens, we need help. Nothing. Yeah. So to his credit, he kept the team together. Is that him? Is that his leadership crew? I don't know, but I always had the impression that team spirit and the effort was there.
Yeah. it's good to hear that because, like you say, the circumstances that Everton had, like you say, the 2 point deductions, and then the ability to appeal it, but not know until potentially after the
Oh,
season's finished that it's going to be successful. So, yeah, sounds like he's obviously had a difficult time this past 2 years. Moving on then to the relationship then with the fans, points deduction. Did that give him any sort of leeway with the fans? Got a bit maybe buy him a bit more time, or
well, it's hard. I mean, I think it's been a tough time, relatively speaking, for Everton fans. And obviously, it's a little hard for me to gauge exactly what things are in the L4 from over here in Washington, D.C. I've been over there many times, but it doesn't mean that I definitely have the pulse. But I think some people didn't like how defeatist he was sometimes, and how often in press conferences he just kind of setting expectations relatively low. I personally viewed it as fine. I think he was being a bit of a realist. He's somewhat pragmatic based on the circumstance, but some people don't have the context. They think, what the heck happened to our club? This was one of the storied, teams in English football. And at a minimum, before Moshiri showed up and threw the money around very irresponsibly, we at least were the best of the rest at a minimum. This is a 9-time top flight winner here. What's going on? But I think really, if you look at the circumstances and whatnot in it, I'm sure he was worn down by it. And he said many times, if it wasn't what I thought it was going to be when he showed up into it. Now, that being said, Jock, I mean, how did you not know what it was going to be like, man? I mean, it was pretty obvious, and a little bit of it was maybe bad luck, but no, I don't think the fans really embraced him. It's hard to compare him with the David Moyes too, because he's naturally already has the foundation and is well thought of. Frank Lampard was not necessarily the most effective manager, but I think one that was fairly liked by the fan base. He kind of connected with them fairly well. But he also had the benefit of coming in from Rafa Benitez, who literally is maybe the most destructive and least popular manager in recent Everton history, if not ever. So, yeah, I mean, he had a tough gig. I think people were a little unreasonable with him at times, but that's what a fan base is sometimes, that's experienced success and hasn't experienced it in a long time.
Yeah, you said the word defeatist and setting expectations. I don't think that's something that would fly.
Oh, no. Oh, no. No. Can you imagine? No, absolutely not. That's not going to work at all.
No, just brings me on to my next point is that, like, as I said last week, first is everything and second is nothing in this league is a famous quote from an ex-Rangers player, Fernando Rickson. Do you think, say he did take the job, do you think he'd be able to compete and basically adapt and survive up in Scotland, where the expectation is, a loss or a draw is unthinkable, whereas Everton being a Premier League team, your sort of your expectations is mid-table with maybe a push for Europe and maybe a decent cup run. Do you think he could cope with that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think most Everton supporters would wish that they didn't hear what you just said. They said, "No, come on, we should be top of it." But you got to be realistic right now. I mean, hopefully the future is bright with the stadium and
Well, the new
whatnot.
stadium should hopefully help you there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we'll see how recruitment goes. I mean, that's what matters, right? I mean, you got to get it right. It's a competitive league for sure. Honestly, I think I should probably do fine in terms of dealing with that, only because I think he thinks himself that way. Like, think about it, man. I mean, you've got to have a little bit of confidence to take a job like Rangers, because the expectations is you win the league, you're getting into Europe, you're going to beat some guys too. And there's been some success of that recently. I know the European scene is a little bit difficult on Scottish clubs right now. I mean, no question, right? Hell, it's difficult for anyone that's not in the Premier League, it seems like, right? That isn't Real Madrid and Barcelona. So, yeah, I think he views himself like that, though. I really do. I think he views himself as befitting of that type of club. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, I don't love the style of play for you all. I think what he would do is just pressure high a lot. I mean, he still does want to control space rather than the ball. And I think ultimately with the right players, you'd still be relatively successful. But I don't think you'd be really entertained or happy doing it. So I don't think it would work, over the long run for sure. And frankly, I mean, is he an exciting name to anyone at Rangers? Like, really, is that someone that's getting you all excited to watch football? I don't think so. And that's a tough hill to climb up, don't you think?
Yeah, no, that's it. Like I said earlier, as soon as the name was announced, I was like, yeah, it's not. It doesn't. It's not exciting. And as what you say, the brand of football might be the most exciting brand of football as well. And up here, we need attacking football. This has been Rangers' struggle this season, has been able to break down teams and get too many draws, too many losses where we've been suckered in the counter attack, or we've maybe been hit early and then the team sit back and we just can't break them down. I don't think a Sean Dyche style of football would be able to counter that.
No, he's not your guy. I mean, he would achieve it by pressure, nothing on the ball. There's just not a lot of passing sequences, not a lot of dynamic design in possession. Again, he might get results, but it would be because he'd have players and intensity and strength. And I'm sure everyone would love the physical brand of football to some extent, but no, it's just not. I mean, Rangers play much better football than I think this guy would bring, even with better players. So, again, like I kind of said up front, I would be surprised if Thelwell brought him in anyway or considered him to begin with, not because he had some issue with Sean Dyche, but I don't think that they were perfect fits. And I don't think the style of play works at all. So I think it's unlikely anyway. I mean, even when I asked my people that I know at Everton that worked under Sean and Kevin both, they were very surprised at a suggestion that Kevin would bring him in. So he's not a bad manager. He's probably underrated, deserves a lot of credit for what he did with the situation he was in. And I think in the long run, Evertonians are going to look back and appreciate the stuff that he did. But no, I don't think he's a good fit. And I feel pretty confident in saying he's not coming to Glasgow.
I actually just this morning I actually seen an article. So he's been linked to a championship club, and I think that's probably where he's going to end up. Just then, if you could sum up his time at Everton, then Ryan, please.
Yeah, happy to do that. Did very well in difficult circumstances. The team never lacked heart; they never lacked spirit. I think some of the fans appreciated some of what he did, but I think ultimately the standard of play, kind of the general negative attitude he had in pressers, I think the press in particular members did not like his arrogance at times. Kind of, he comes across as like this warm, kind of fun guy you want to have a pint with, but in many ways he's not really. And I just think ultimately the team, even if Dyche, I think they wanted Dyche to stay out the year, to be perfectly honest. That was the plan, and then really reboot in the summer. I think it's very disappointing the way he went out, how stubborn he was, and how just wanting to be the smart, brilliant guy in the room. And I think he wore out his welcome. I think fundamentally that's really what it came down to. And if Everton have aspirations to go in a certain direction, I don't think he was ever going to be the guy to take the club forward. And my guess is he knew that and probably kind of packed it in a little bit, to be honest. So I think long run, people look at it fondly. Good job in difficult circumstances. Kept us up when it almost looked like it wasn't possible. Exceeded expectations probably as the whole, but not the right guy to take the club forward, and certainly doesn't make a lot of sense to Rangers.
Ryan, thanks for your time. If you just want to let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Check out the Blue Frontier. We do a lot of analysis across the Premier League and football, not just Everton. But yeah, our take on things is a little bit different, a little tactical, a little analytic at times, a little bit of a unique voice, we think. Feel free to check us out and give us a shout and let me know what you think. But really, the pleasure is all mine, Jock. I really appreciate what you guys do here, and I'm happy to be on.
No, thanks for your time, Ryan. That was brilliant. Thanks very much.